The laughter echoed off the marble floors, sharp and mocking. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, held a hand to her perfectly painted lips, her eyes crinkling with amusement as she looked from me to the handbag I was admiring. It was a simple, elegant piece of craftsmanship, displayed like a jewel under a soft spotlight. The price tag was discreet, but we both knew it cost more than the car I drove. "Oh, Sarah," she tittered, her voice just loud enough for the other patrons and the impeccably dressed sales associates to hear. "You have expensive taste for someone on such a fixed income. Don't you think that's a little out of your league? Maybe we should look at the discount outlets later. I'm sure we can find you a nice little knockoff." She winked at my son, Mark, who stood beside her, shifting his weight uncomfortably, but saying nothing. He just gave me a weak, apologetic smile, the kind he'd been giving me for the past 5 years. I didn't answer her. I just continued to gaze at the bag, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation she so enjoyed inflicting. This was her favorite game, reminding me of my place. The poor, widowed mother her husband had to support. As her laughter died down, a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit hurried out from a back office. His eyes scanned the showroom, and when they landed on me, they widened in recognition. He walked briskly, almost running, past Tiffany and Mark, and came to a stop directly in front of me. He bowed, a deep, respectful gesture that silenced the entire store. "Madam," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "We weren't expecting you today. Welcome. It is an honor to have you here." Tiffany's smug grin froze on her face, her eyes darting between me and the store manager. The color drained from her cheeks. She had no idea that the luxury brand she worshipped, the one she used to measure her own self-worth, was built from the ground up with my late husband's money, and that I was its silent majority owner. You're probably wondering why my own son and his wife had no concept of who I really was. To understand how I became a ghost in my own life, we have to go back to the day my husband, Richard, died, and my son was forced to choose between his mother and his inheritance. Richard and I were a team. For 40 years, we built a life from scratch. He was the brilliant designer, the visionary with a love for timeless elegance, and I was the one with the head for numbers and strategy. I'd given up a scholarship to study business to marry him, a choice I never once regretted. While he sketched designs in our small garage, I balanced the books at our kitchen table. When he secured his first major contract, I was the one who negotiated the terms. He was the face of the brand, the charming genius everyone adored. But I was the foundation, the unseen structure that allowed his dream to reach for the sky. Our son, Mark, was the pinnacle of that dream. He was our world. We gave him everything we never had: private schools, trips to Europe, a brand new car the day he turned 16. We shielded him from struggle, believing we were giving him a gift. Richard, however, saw the cracks forming long before I did. "The boy has a soft spine, Sarah," he'd say late at night, after Mark had quit another summer internship because the work was beneath him. "We've made things too easy for him. The world won't be so kind." I'd always defend Mark, telling my husband he was just young and needed time to find his passion. But deep down, I knew Richard was right. Mark was a good person at heart, but he was accustomed to praise, not perseverance. He expected success to be handed to him, just like everything else had been. Then came Tiffany. Mark met her in his final year of college, and at first, she seemed perfect. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to adore our son. She showered Richard and me with compliments, calling me the mother she never had, and hanging on Richard's every word about the business. She spoke of legacy, of family, of carrying on the brand for generations to come. We were so blinded by the perfect picture she painted that we missed the faint, predatory gleam in her eyes. We didn't see that she wasn't in love with our son. She was in love with our son's future. She saw the name on the building, the wealth in our portfolio, and the easy life that came with it. And she saw Mark for exactly what he was, a golden key, easily turned. Richard's diagnosis came like a thunderclap on a clear day, an aggressive cancer that gave him 6 months. In those final months, the fault lines in our family cracked wide open. Mark, who had never faced true hardship, couldn't handle the reality of his father's decline. He would visit for a few minutes, his eyes darting around the room, unable to look at the man who had always been his hero, now frail and diminished. Tiffany, however, saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. Her visits were filled with talk of the company. "We need to ensure a smooth transition for the sake of the shareholders," she'd say, ostensibly to Richard, but really for my benefit. She'd bring quarterly reports to his bedside, pointing out market trends and suggesting Mark take on a more official leadership role to reassure investors. It was a ghoulish, thinly veiled power grab. Richard saw it all. One evening, when we were alone, he took my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "He's not ready, Sarah," he whispered. "That woman has her hooks in him so deep, he can't see straight. He'll run the company into the ground, and she'll be cheering him on as she spends every last dime." My heart broke, not just for my dying husband, but for the son we had lost. Richard told me then what he had done. He'd had his lawyer, Mr. Harrison, draw up 2 wills. One was for show, the other, the real one, would protect everything we had built. "Let them think they have it all," he told me, a spark of his old fire in his eyes. "Let them show you who they truly are. The real power will be with you. You were always the smarter one anyway." When Richard passed, the grief was a wave that threatened to pull me under. At the funeral, Tiffany wore the most expensive black dress she could find and sobbed theatrically into a silk handkerchief, while Mark stood stiffly, looking more like a young CEO at a press conference than a grieving son. A week later, we sat in Mr. Harrison's office for the reading of the will. Just as Richard had planned, the document named Mark as the new CEO and primary heir to the family fortune. I was bequeathed the modest house I'd lived in for 40 years and a monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. Tiffany's face was a mask of triumph. She squeezed Mark's arm, her eyes shining with greed. They thought the game was over. They didn't realize I was just letting them set up the board. The change was instantaneous. The moment we left the lawyer's office, the mask of dutiful son and caring daughter-in-law dropped. Mark began referring to the company as my company, and Tiffany began her reign as the queen of a kingdom she had not earned. Their first act was to sell our beautiful, traditional family home, the one filled with memories of Richard, and buy a monstrous glass and steel mansion that looked cold and empty. Then came the cars, the parties, the reckless spending. Mark, under Tiffany's guidance, started changing the business my husband had so carefully built. He chased flashy, short-term trends, abandoning the commitment to quality that was our brand's hallmark. He was a child playing dress-up in his father's suit, and Tiffany was the one pulling his strings. My life, in turn, became small and quiet. My stipend, which they made sure to call my allowance, often arrived late. Tiffany would sometimes deliver the check herself, sweeping into my modest home wearing a new fur coat, placing the envelope on my table with a sigh, as if the effort of helping the poor was exhausting. You have to be more careful with your spending, Sarah, she'd say, eyeing my simple furniture with disdain. We can't just bail you out all the time. They stopped inviting me for holidays, claiming their new friends were a younger crowd and that I wouldn't enjoy myself. They were trying to erase me, to make me a forgotten footnote in the story of their glorious success. The final illusion I held about my son shattered during a winter storm. A large branch fell and damaged my roof, causing a serious leak in the attic. I called Mark, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the humiliation of having to ask for his help. He sounded concerned and promised to send a contractor right away. Hours passed, and no one came. I called again, but this time, Tiffany answered his phone. "Mark is in a very important meeting, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And frankly, we think it's time you learn to handle your own affairs. Your allowance should be more than enough to cover minor household repairs. This is exactly the kind of dependency Richard was worried about." She hung up. I stood there, in the quiet of my house, listening to the steady drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling. It was the sound of my last hope for the son I once knew, dying. I spent 5 years in that quiet house, watching from a distance as my son and his wife dismantle my husband's legacy. I endured the late checks, the condescending remarks, and the suffocating loneliness. I did it because Richard had asked me to give Mark every chance to prove him wrong. And I did it because a part of me, a stubborn, foolish mother's heart, still hoped my son would wake up. That hope finally died on the night of the company's 50th anniversary gala. I was shocked when the invitation arrived, a thick, embossed cardstock that felt foreign in my hands. For the first time in years, they were inviting me to something. A foolish optimism bloomed in my chest. Maybe Mark wanted to reconnect. Maybe he finally felt his father's absence and wanted his mother by his side. I chose my best dress, a simple navy blue sheath that Richard had always loved. It was timeless and elegant, but as soon as I stepped into the glittering hotel ballroom, I knew I was out of place. The room was a sea of sequins and diamonds, filled with strangers who were louder, younger, and richer than anyone I had ever known. I saw Mark and Tiffany holding court near a massive ice sculpture of the company logo. When Tiffany spotted me, her smile was a slash of red lipstick. She glided over, her couture gown shimmering under the chandeliers, a group of her friends trailing her like pilot fish. "Sarah, you made it!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the room. "We're so glad you could come out of your little shell for the evening." Her friends giggled. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. Tiffany looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress with theatrical pity. "Oh, bless your heart, still wearing that old thing. You're so sentimental." Then she did the one thing that incinerated the last shred of my maternal love. She turned to Mark, plucked his wallet from his jacket, and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. She pressed the cash into my hand, her manicured nails digging into my palm. "Here," she said in a loud, charitable voice. "Go and buy yourself something new. We can't have people thinking we don't take care of our own family." The silence was deafening. I looked at the money in my hand, then at my son's face, which was blank with cowardly shame. And in that moment, the woman who had loved him unconditionally ceased to exist. Something cold and clear took her place. I calmly folded the bills and slipped them into my purse. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady. "This will be more useful than you could ever possibly imagine." I walked out of that ballroom and didn't look back. The cold night air felt cleansing, washing away the last remnants of the weak, hopeful woman I had been. I didn't take a cab. I walked the 2 miles home, the crisp $100 bills cool and solid in my purse. With every step, a 5-year fog of grief and patience lifted, replaced by a diamond-hard clarity. By the time I reached my front door, the plan was already forming in my mind. The revenge wouldn't be swift and angry. It would be slow, deliberate, and exquisitely public. They had built their entire identity on a foundation of money and status. I was going to demolish that foundation, brick by gilded brick. The next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, I made my first call. Mr. Harrison, our family lawyer, answered on the first ring. He was a man of immense discretion and loyalty, and he had been Richard's closest confidant. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm but concerned. "I was sorry to hear you attended the gala. I can only imagine—" I cut him off. "It's time, David," I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a quiet, profound sigh of relief. "I've been waiting for this call for 5 years, Sarah. The documents are ready." In his office, he laid it all out. Richard hadn't just left me with controlling shares. He had left me with everything. The will that had been read was a legal placeholder. A second binding document named me the sole executor and beneficiary of the true estate. With Mark appointed as a provisional acting manager, his position entirely subject to my approval. Every car, every party, every gaudy piece of furniture in their glass mansion had been bought with my money. Mark hadn't been a CEO. He'd been a house sitter who was throwing a party and trashing the place. Mr. Harrison had already prepared the paperwork to revoke Mark's signing authority and transfer all assets back under my direct control. But I told him to wait. The first step had to be personal. Later that afternoon, I picked up the phone and dialed Tiffany's number. I pitched my voice to sound small and frail. "Tiffany," I began, feigning a sniffle. "I wanted to thank you for last night. You were right. I've let myself go. That money you gave me, I was hoping maybe you could help me buy a new handbag so I can feel a little better about myself." The bait was cast. Her sigh was loud and dramatic, but I could hear the smirk in her voice. The chance to flaunt her superiority and generosity in her favorite designer store, it was a temptation her ego could never resist. "Of course, Sarah," she said. "I suppose I can make time for you tomorrow." The car ride to the city was a masterclass in Tiffany's arrogance. She lectured me on the importance of investing in classic pieces, while simultaneously reminding me that my budget was limited. "We'll find you a nice, simple little bag," she said, patting my hand with the kind of condescension one reserves for a slow-witted child. "Something durable. You don't need to worry about brand names." My son drove, his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was a silent, complicit chauffeur for his wife's cruelty. I simply nodded, my serene agreement seeming to irritate Tiffany more than any argument could have. She needed me to be pathetic and needy to feel powerful. My quiet composure was throwing her off her game. When we stepped into the brand's flagship store, it was like a scene from her dreams. The staff flocked to her, calling her Mrs. Sterling, offering her champagne, and asking about her last purchase. She basked in the attention, making a grand show of introducing me. "This is my mother-in-law, Sarah," she announced to the staff. "We're helping her find something a little more appropriate for her lifestyle." She led me towards a small display of wallets and keychains near the entrance, but I walked right past her. My eyes were fixed on the bag in the center of the showroom, the one displayed on a pedestal like a work of art. I walked over, ignoring Tiffany's hiss to "be careful," and ran my hand over the supple leather. That's when her laughter started, exactly as I knew it would. Oh, Sarah, she tittered, her voice echoing in the hushed, opulent space. You have expensive taste for someone on such a fixed income. Don't you think that's a little out of your league? The sales associates shifted uncomfortably. Mark looked at the floor. Tiffany was in her element, the benevolent queen shaming the court jester. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her savor her triumph. Just then, the store manager, a distinguished man named Jean-Pierre, came striding out of his office, his expression urgent. He bypassed Tiffany as if she were a piece of furniture and came to a halt before me. He bowed deeply from the waist. "Madam Sterling," he said, his voice resonating with profound respect. "1,000 apologies. We were not aware you would be gracing us with your presence today. Welcome." Tiffany's jaw dropped. The smug smirk evaporated, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed confusion. What did you just call her?" she stammered, looking at Jean-Pierre. He ignored her completely, his attention focused solely on me. I gave him a small, appreciative smile before turning my gaze to my daughter-in-law. My voice when I spoke was no longer frail. It was the calm, clear voice of a woman who had owned boardrooms. He called me Madam Sterling, Tiffany. The real Madam Sterling, the one who signs his paycheck. I picked up the handbag from its pedestal. "And I believe I'll take this one. Please have it wrapped. And you can put away your husband's wallet. This will go on my account." A stunned silence fell over the store. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. Finally, she found her voice, a shrill, panicked shriek. "You're lying! That's insane! Mark, tell her she's lying. Tell them who you are." She grabbed our son's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. Mark looked from her to me, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. "Mom, what is this? I don't understand. Dad left the company to me." I met his gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. He saw the stranger I had become. "No, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "Your father left you with a test. The company, the accounts, the properties, they were all placed in a trust that I am the sole executor of. You were named a provisional manager to be observed and evaluated. For 5 years, I have been observing, and today, your evaluation is complete." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You failed." Tiffany began to hyperventilate. No, the credit cards." She fumbled in her purse for her wallet. "You can't do this." I gave a slight nod to Jean-Pierre, who was already holding a phone to his ear. "As a matter of fact, I can," I said calmly. "Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, filed the paperwork an hour ago. As we speak, your corporate accounts are being frozen. The credit card you're holding is now a useless piece of plastic. The car you drove here in is a company vehicle, and your access has been revoked. You'll need to take a taxi home." The final blow was the one that made Mark stumble backward. "And speaking of home," I continued, my voice unwavering, "the house you live in is also a company asset. You have until Monday morning to remove your personal belongings. My security team will be there at 9 a.m. to change the locks." Mark finally broke. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You can't. Where will we go? What will we do? I'm your son." I looked at the man my son had become, a hollow shell of entitlement and weakness, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. "You made your choice, Mark. You chose this life of careless cruelty. You stood by and allowed your wife to humiliate your mother. Now, you get to live with the consequences of that choice, together." With that, an assistant brought me my new handbag, beautifully wrapped. I took it, thanked Jean-Pierre, and walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving them in the ruins of the life they thought they owned. The weeks that followed were a quiet storm of legal proceedings and corporate restructuring. Mark and Tiffany, stripped of their assets and their social standing, vanished from the world they had so desperately tried to conquer. Their fair-weather friends abandoned them instantly. I heard through Mr. Harrison that they had moved into a small, cramped apartment across town. Tiffany, who had never known a day of real work, was forced to take a job as a hostess at a chain restaurant. Mark, his reputation in the business community destroyed, struggled to find any work at all. Their marriage, a fragile thing built on wealth and status, began to fracture under the weight of mediocrity and resentment. They had received exactly the life they had deserved. I, in turn, stepped back into the world I had helped build. I took my rightful place as the chairman of the company. My first order of business was to undo the damage Mark had done, steering the brand back to the principles of quality and integrity that Richard had established. I rehired the old artisans he had let go and restored the classic designs he had discontinued. The company flourished, not with flashy, hollow growth, but with the solid, respectable strength it had always possessed. I established a foundation in Richard's name, funding scholarships for young designers who showed promise but lacked opportunity, ensuring his legacy was one of creation, not destruction. About a year later, I was leaving a late dinner with some board members when I saw them. Tiffany was standing outside a bus stop, her face pinched and tired, arguing with Mark, who looked defeated and much older than his years. Her restaurant uniform was creased, and his suit was cheap and ill-fitting. Mark looked up and saw me as my driver held the car door open. Our eyes met across the street. There was a universe of shame, anger, and regret in his gaze. I didn't smile, nor did I scowl. I simply held his gaze for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the path he had chosen. Then I got into my car and was driven away. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about reclaiming the life and the respect they had tried to take from me. I had found my peace, not in their downfall, but in my own quiet, unshakable strength.